Did you know that men account for nearly 80% of all suicides globally? Let that sink in. 4 out of 5 people who take their own lives are men. 4 out of 5. We're not talking about a slight disparity. We're talking about a chasm, a gaping wound in the fabric of our society. But where's the outrage? Where are the marches, the hashtags, the endless media coverage? They are shockingly, deafeningly silent. And why is that? I'll tell you why. Because it doesn't fit the narrative. It doesn't serve the agenda. Is modern feminism systematically dismantling masculinity? No. Dismantling implies a passive process, an accident. This is far more sinister. This is a deliberate, calculated assault on the very essence of manhood. This isn't about equality. It's about revenge. It's about power. It's about inverting the natural order and placing men in a position of subservience. Today, we're not going to tiptoe around the truth. We're not going to be politically correct. We're going to rip the veil off this insidious agenda and expose the undeniable evidence of misandry, the hatred and prejudice against men that the mainstream media conveniently ignores. They'll call us misogynists, bigots, incels, let them. They fear the truth. They fear the awakening of men who refuse to be silenced any longer. By the end of this call, your eyes will be opened. You'll see the world and your place in it through a completely different, ruthlessly clear lens. You will understand the systemic forces arrayed against you, the subtle manipulations, the outright lies, and you will be armed with the knowledge to fight back. This isn't just about understanding. It's about survival. It's about reclaiming your birthright as a man, a strong, proud, unapologetic man. Prepare to have your worldview shattered. The toxic masculinity myth, a weapon against strength. Let's cut the pleasantries and get straight to the jugular. Have you ever felt that creeping sense of unease when you're told to tone it down, to be less aggressive, to be more sensitive? That's not coincidence. That's the insidious weaponization of the term toxic masculinity at work. It's a phrase designed to make you question your very nature, to make you ashamed of the inherent traits that make you a man. It is a clever, underhanded tactic. Competitiveness, labeled toxic. Stoicism in the face of adversity, toxic. Assertiveness, you guessed it, toxic. This isn't about identifying and correcting genuinely harmful behaviors. It's about a systematic dismantling of everything that makes men men. They are systematically castrating the male spirit with this term. This is an attack on our very core being. Think about it. Where do you see this narrative pushed? Everywhere. In schools, little boys are scolded for roughhousing, for playing war games, for exhibiting the natural energy that has fueled exploration, innovation, and protection for millennia. Johnny, a bright, energetic 7-year-old, gets sent to the principal's office for pushing another boy on the playground during a game of tag. He's told his behavior is too aggressive, that he needs to learn to share his feelings instead of acting out. His natural, primal urge to compete, to test his physical limits, is branded as wrong. His spirit is crushed, his confidence undermined. He learns to suppress his instincts, to second-guess his every action. This isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern repeated countless times across the nation, creating a generation of young men terrified of their own shadows. What an atrocity! It doesn't stop there. The media relentlessly bombards us with images of enlightened men who are passive, emotionally vulnerable, and constantly apologizing for their very existence. The alpha males, the leaders, the warriors, are depicted as brutish villains, relics of a bygone era. Corporate training programs, once focused on building leadership and teamwork, now spend hours on sensitivity training, effectively neutering ambitious men and forcing them to walk on eggshells lest they offend someone with their inherent drive. This isn't progress. It's regression. It's the deliberate crippling of the very men who are supposed to be building, leading, and protecting society. They are intentionally crippling you. Let's dissect this phrase, toxic masculinity, like a surgeon examining a cancerous tumor. What does it even mean? It implies that there's something inherently poisonous about masculinity itself, that the very essence of being a man is somehow flawed. This is a blatant lie. It's a linguistic sleight of hand, a way to associate natural male traits with negativity and undesirability. It's a calculated attack designed to undermine male confidence and self-esteem. The inherent bias is glaringly obvious. There's no equivalent term for women, is there? No toxic femininity, shamming women for their nurturing instincts or emotional intelligence. The double standard is breathtaking in its audacity. The result: a generation of emasculated men, afraid to take risks, afraid to lead, afraid to even be men. They're hesitant, apologetic, and riddled with self-doubt. They've been taught to suppress their natural instincts, to conform to a feminized ideal that is fundamentally at odds with their core being. This isn't about creating a kinder, gentler world. It's about destroying the strength and resilience that men bring to the table. It's about systematic castration of the male spirit, leaving a void that can only be filled with weakness and dependence. It's a deliberate, calculated, and utterly devastating attack on the very foundation of our society. Are you going to stand for it? The legal system, stacked against men. Let's cut the pleasantries and dive straight into the abyss. The family court system is not a bastion of justice. It's a judicial meat grinder disproportionately chewing up men and spitting them out. We're not talking about isolated incidents. We're talking about a systemic, ingrained bias that treats men as second-class citizens, as walking wallets, and worst of all, as expendable in the lives of their own children. Custody battles. Forget the image of fair and impartial. Mothers are awarded primary custody in a staggering majority of cases, numbers that are often concealed, deliberately obfuscated. But those that dig find around 80% nationally, though some jurisdictions are even worse. Why? Because the system, marinated in feminist ideology, operates under the assumption that women are inherently better caregivers. This is the tender years doctrine, often unacknowledged but ruthlessly applied, a relic of Victorian-era sexism that somehow persists. Only now it's used against men. Fathers are forced to prove their fitness, while mothers are often given the benefit of the doubt, even in cases of questionable behavior. The burden of proof is flipped, and the consequences are devastating. Divorce settlements, financial enslavement. Think divorce is a 50-50 split. Think again. Men are routinely subjected to financial ruin through alimony and child support payments that often far exceed reasonable needs. We're not talking about supporting the children. We're talking about punishing the man for daring to, well, be a man. Alimony, in many cases, has become a permanent entitlement, a reward for simply having been married, regardless of contribution or need. It's a system that incentivizes divorce and penalizes men for being the higher earners, a role often forced upon them by societal expectations. This isn't equality. It's financial lynching. False accusations, the ultimate weapon. In the age of Me Too, a mere accusation can destroy a man's life, career, and reputation. And the legal system, it often facilitates this destruction. False accusations of domestic violence or abuse are rampant in custody battles, used as a strategic weapon to gain leverage and alienate fathers from their children. The presumption of innocence, gone. Men are guilty until proven innocent, and even then, the stain of the accusation often lingers. The damage is irreversible, and the legal system offers little to no recourse for men who have been falsely accused. Where's the justice in that? Let's paint a vivid, horrifying picture. Imagine John, a dedicated father, a loving husband, blindsided by his wife's sudden desire for divorce. She hires a shark of a lawyer, a woman steeped in feminist legal theory, who immediately paints John as controlling and emotionally abusive, using vague, unsubstantiated claims. She files for a restraining order based on manufactured evidence, barring him from his home and his children. In court, the judge, a woman with a well-documented history of siding with mothers in custody cases, barely listens to John's side of the story. He's ordered to pay exorbitant child support and alimony, leaving him financially crippled. He's granted only supervised visitation with his children, forced to interact with them under the watchful eye of a court-appointed monitor, treated like a criminal. He loses his job because of the stress and the stigma of the accusations. He's alienated from his friends and family, who are hesitant to take sides. He's left a broken shell of a man, stripped of his dignity, his finances, and most tragically, his children. This isn't a hypothetical. This is the reality for countless men across the country. It is a judicial massacre happening every single day. How can we claim equality when the scales of justice are so blatantly tipped against men? This isn't about a few bad apples, rogue judges, or vindictive ex-wives. This is about a systemic problem, a deeply ingrained bias that permeates the entire legal framework. It's a system that views men as inherently suspect, as potential abusers, as financial resources to be exploited. It's a system that needs to be radically overhauled, dismantled brick by brick, and rebuilt on the foundation of true equality and justice. Until then, men entering the family court system are stepping into a battlefield where the odds are stacked overwhelmingly against them, a place where their lives can be irrevocably destroyed with the stroke of a pen. The fight for true equality must include a fight for justice for men in the legal system. It's time to expose this travesty and demand change. It's time to stop the judicial lynching, the erasure of male victims, silence and shame. Let's cut through the politically correct garbage and speak the brutal truth. Men are victims too, and their suffering is systematically erased, ridiculed, and ignored. It's a conspiracy of silence so profound, it's practically criminal. We're talking about domestic violence, sexual assault, the kind of horrors that leave scars far deeper than any physical wound. But because the victim has a Y chromosome, their pain is deemed less valid, less real. Think about it. How often do you hear about male victims of domestic abuse in the mainstream media? Almost never. Instead, you're bombarded with the narrative that all men are potential abusers, that masculinity itself is inherently toxic. This creates a chilling effect, a climate of fear where men are terrified to speak out, terrified of being labeled weak, pathetic, or even worse, accused of lying to discredit their female abuser. Imagine the agonizing isolation. The psychological impact of this denial is catastrophic. Imagine a man beaten, bruised, emotionally shattered by his partner, reaching out for help, only to be met with disbelief, mockery, or even outright hostility. He's told to man up, to stop being a wimp, as if his suffering is somehow his own fault, a sign of his failure as a man. He's trapped in a cage of shame, his cries for help echoing in an empty void. This is like being buried alive, slowly suffocating under the weight of societal indifference. It's the ultimate betrayal to be victimized twice, once by the abuser, and again by a society that refuses to acknowledge your pain. He's a ghost in his own life, unseen, unheard, unvalued. This isn't just about abstract statistics. It's about the deliberate silencing of male pain. It's a cultural gaslighting campaign of epic proportions. Consider the anecdotal evidence, the countless stories whispered in online forums of men whose reports to the police were dismissed, whose pleas for help were ignored by friends and family, who were even laughed at by therapists. Think of the young man, sexually assaulted, who's too ashamed to tell anyone because he knows he'll be branded a faggot or accused of enjoying it. He internalizes the trauma, carrying it like a poisonous secret until it festers and consumes him from the inside out. He is forced to fight his demons alone, in the cold, dark silence, a solitary warrior with no army and no hope of rescue. Now, compare this to the immediate belief and support often given to female victims. While every victim deserves compassion and justice, the stark contrast in treatment is undeniable. A woman reports abuse, and she's immediately surrounded by support groups, shelters, and legal aid. A man reports abuse, and he's lucky if he gets a skeptical look and a pat on the back. This isn't about minimizing female suffering. It's about highlighting the glaring double standard, the insidious bias that renders male pain invisible. It's a grotesque injustice, a societal blind spot so vast, It's like staring into the abyss. We're raising a generation of men who believe their suffering doesn't matter, that their voices will never be heard. This, my friend, is a recipe for disaster, a ticking time bomb of repressed rage and despair. It's time to shatter the silence and expose this shameful truth for what it is. A war on men, waged under the guise of equality. The education system, indoctrination, not education. Listen and listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you is the cold, hard truth they don't want you to hear. From the very first day a boy sets foot in a preschool, he's bombarded with a subtle, yet insidious message. Your natural instincts are wrong. This isn't education. It's indoctrination, a systematic dismantling of masculinity under the guise of equality. Think about it. How many times have you heard phrases like boys will be boys dismissed as outdated and harmful? How often are boys reprimanded for being, well, boys? For running, for competing, for displaying even the slightest hint of aggression, which, let's be honest, is a fundamental part of the male psyche. It's a biological imperative forged over millennia of evolution, and they're trying to erase it. This is social engineering on a massive, horrifying scale. Let's delve into the specifics. Curriculum changes, meticulously designed and implemented, are actively erasing male heroes and male perspectives from history books. Where are the stories of courageous men who built civilizations, explored uncharted territories, and defended their families? Replaced, more often than not, with narratives that emphasize female victimhood and male culpability. Biased textbooks paint a picture of a world where men are the perpetual oppressors, conveniently ignoring the countless sacrifices men have made throughout history. It's a deliberate distortion of reality, designed to instill guilt and shame in young boys, making them question their very existence. This is ideological warfare, waged on the minds of our sons, and the anti-male rhetoric. It's pervasive. Teachers, often unconsciously, perpetuate the feminist narrative, praising girls for being collaborative and empathetic, while subtly or not so subtly criticizing boys for being disruptive or competitive. The classroom environment itself is often structured in a way that favors girls' learning styles, leaving boys feeling alienated and disadvantaged. They are medicating boyhood. They want docile, compliant sheep, not strong, independent lions. Consider this infuriating, yet utterly believable, hypothetical scenario. A school implements a no-touch policy during recess, effectively eliminating any form of rough and tumble play, a crucial aspect of male bonding and development. A young boy, energized and full of life, instinctively engages in a harmless game of tag, accidentally bumping into a girl. The girl, encouraged by the prevailing atmosphere of female fragility, bursts into tears. Boy is immediately reprimanded, labeled a troublemaker, and possibly even suspended. His natural, healthy instincts are branded as dangerous and toxic. This is not about protecting children. It's about actively suppressing boys, crushing their spirits, and molding them into compliant, emasculated versions of what a man should be. This extends all the way to university. Women's studies departments churn out graduates steeped in feminist ideology, perpetuating the cycle of misandry. Critical thinking is replaced with dogma, and any challenge to the prevailing narrative is met with accusations of sexism and misogyny. Young men, already struggling with their identity in a world that constantly tells them they're inherently flawed, are further marginalized and silenced. The result: a generation of men who are afraid to assert themselves, afraid to lead, afraid to be men. This isn't about empowering girls. It's about actively, deliberately, and ruthlessly suppressing boys, breaking their spirits, and creating a generation of weak, subservient males. They're not leveling the playing field. They're tilting it so far in the other direction that boys are falling off the edge. The patriarchy power paradox. Who really holds the reins? Let's talk about this supposed all-powerful patriarchy, this invisible hand of male dominance that supposedly controls everything. If men are so in control, if we wield such unimaginable power, then why? Why are we the ones overwhelmingly filling the body bags coming back from wars? Think about it. Think about the sheer, brutal statistic. The vast majority of combat deaths, the limbs blown off, the minds shattered by PTSD, they belong to men. Is that power? Look at the most dangerous jobs, the oil rigs, where a single spark can turn you into a human torch. The construction sites where a misplaced step means a fatal fall. The deep sea fishing vessels where a rogue wave can sweep you into the freezing abyss. Who's doing those jobs? Men. Overwhelmingly, sickeningly, men. We're talking about jobs with staggering mortality rates, jobs that break bodies and shorten lifespans. Are these the coveted positions of a privileged class, or the brutal realities faced by those forced to provide, to sacrifice? They're expected to be the strong ones, to take this burden for families and the great society. And what about the homeless? Walk down any city street and tell me what you see. The huddled figures shivering in doorways, the men ravaged by addiction and despair. Are these the faces of power? Or are they the discarded, the forgotten, the casualties of a system that claims to be run by them, yet leaves them to rot? It's a cruel joke, a disgusting lie. These men, broken and discarded, are held up as proof of male dominance, while simultaneously being ignored, their suffering minimized. It is absolutely infuriating. For generations, men have been conditioned, brainwashed even, to believe that their role is to be the provider, the protector, the sacrificial lamb. From the moment we're boys, we're told to man up, to take it like a man, to suppress our emotions, to shoulder the burdens of the world without complaint. We're taught that our value lies in our ability to provide, to endure pain, to die if necessary, for the sake of others. Our grandfathers went to war. Our fathers worked themselves to the bone in factories, mines. We are the ones who risk, the ones who break. This isn't empowerment. It's exploitation. It's a system that uses men, chews them up, and spits them out. The patriarchy isn't some cabal of men plotting in smoke-filled rooms. It's a deeply ingrained societal construct that forces men into a role of servitude, masked as privilege. It's a brilliant, insidious trick. They tell you that you're in charge, while simultaneously demanding your unwavering obedience, your endless labor, and your ultimate sacrifice. The patriarchy myth is nothing more than a carefully crafted lie, a weapon of mass destruction used to guilt men into accepting a subservient role, to make them feel responsible for the world's problems, while simultaneously denying them the right to complain, to show weakness, to be human. It's time to see through the smoke and mirrors, to recognize the truth. We are not the oppressors. We are, in many ways, the oppressed. The patriarchy is not our shield. It is our cage. Let's drive this home with the force of a battering ram. I've shown you, in excruciating detail, how modern feminism isn't about lifting women up. It's about tearing men down. It's not about equality. It's about revenge. It's a calculated, systematic assault on everything that makes a man a man. They've weaponized toxic masculinity, rigged the legal system, silenced male victims, poisoned the education system, and twisted the very concept of power to paint men as oppressors, while simultaneously exploiting their sacrifices. This isn't some abstract academic debate. This is a war for your very soul. Are you going to lie down and take it? Are you going to let them emasculate you, strip you of your dignity, and turn you into a shadow of your true potential? No, absolutely not. It is time for a seismic shift. We need a complete and utter reevaluation of these poisonous societal narratives. We must demand, with the unyielding force of a hurricane, that the scales be balanced, that male suffering be acknowledged, that male strength be celebrated, not condemned. This isn't a request, it's a battle cry. It's time to reclaim what is rightfully yours, your inherent power, your inherent worth, your inherent masculinity. Discard the shackles of guilt and shame they've tried to bind you with. Reject the insidious whispers telling you to be less, to be weaker, to be something other than a man. Embrace the warrior within. Cultivate the iron discipline, the steel will, the ruthless courage that flows through your veins. Become the protector, the provider, the leader you were born to be. Confront the lies. Shatter the false narratives. Fight back against this relentless, insidious attack on your very being. The world needs strong men, now more than ever. Become the unbreakable, unstoppable force you were always meant to be. Don't just survive this cultural war. Dominate it. Become a god among men. This isn't just about you. This is about the future of masculinity itself. Your future, your legacy, is in your hands, so make it a legend. A legend of unbridled power and unstoppable masculine force.